talk a little bit first, and then we'll talk about the article. I want to make just kind of a couple comments, and then we'll turn to the article. And then I will spend the last whatever time I can around other ways of looking at the way humans look at themselves. And then maybe some comments too about how you evaluate yourselves after you're serving or treating someone. The first thing I want to do is I want to get you to think about two examples. And one example is before the fact, and the other example is after the fact. Okay? Now the first example, now what I'm trying to do now, so you kind of know in advance, I'm trying to get you to see how you think. Okay? And the first example is you, I don't know, you're 10, 12 years old, probably even your age now, but I won't deal with that. But anyway, you're 10, 12 years old, and you're in the kitchen, and you want to go over to the refrigerator and get the jelly. And you open the refrigerator door, and you then holler, "Mom, where's the jelly?" And she says, she walks over and she says, "What's right in front of your face?" Okay. Now I'm going to assume that that's happened to every one of you, and it probably still happens to you. Okay. Now this is before the fact, because you didn't get to see the jelly until she pointed it out to you. Okay. Now why didn't you see the jelly? Because it's happened to all of you, and I'm going to assume all of you in here can see. So, didn't? Okay, now we got to deal with. Now, one of the things that we're going to deal with in this article is the idea of how you give meaning to things. All right. Now, I just have two different meanings. One is you said because you see everything else, and you said you didn't look hard enough. Right? Okay, now just take those two comments for a minute here. They're contradictory. I mean, they're almost diametrically opposite. All right? So now, this is how the mind works, I guess. So, is that, now, do all of you want to take one of those positions or a different one, or what's your own thoughts? Why didn't you see it?
You're used to your mom getting it for you all the time, so.
All right.
All
right, so in other words, you're suggesting that you're just kind of, this is not very nice, but you're just kind of lazy.
Sure.
Okay. So in other words, you don't really want to look.
Energy conservationist.
Okay. Valid. But what has happened though, and probably in fairness to you all, is that you went to the refrigerator and you thought you already knew where it was. And you just expected to pick it right off the shelf, probably where you last put it, or where you generally see it. Okay? So it was more a question of you already having your mind made up when you went looking. So keep in mind now, you want to kind of see how your, what I'm going to call your initial premise determines how you see evidence. All right? It's your presupposition that you start with that often determines your actions. Right? So that's first. Now, what I'm doing here, now keep in mind, you primarily work with the body. Right? But you can't just work with the body because there's always a head there. Thank goodness. All right? Now, we're going to try to follow this here. What causes you to say that is, first is, now notice I said, you either have an accident or you're about to have an accident. All right? Now, if you either were about to have an accident or you had an accident, it means you were out of control. Now, try to think when your mom said to you, much earlier than 10, thankfully, "Oh, hurry, don't have an accident." You all heard it. All right? Now, here's the interesting thing. When you were 2 years old, for the first 2 years of your lives, you were totally natural. But one of the first things you had to learn that was unnatural was to tighten your sphincter muscle. and your bladder muscles. You had to learn to tighten that. That was not a natural act. I don't think a baby ever does that when they're born. When they simply go, they go. All right? They have no guilt, no shame, no embarrassment. They just excrete. Okay, so now you have to do something there, and you have to do that why? Why do you have to do an unnatural act? Why are we all taught that? But now, wait. But it's no accident for the baby. They couldn't.
No, it's not.
Right, it's no accident. They just do something that's very, very natural. Why do we have to learn to do something unnatural?
Sanitation.
All right, sanitation, and it's unacceptable in society. In other words, some along the way back in thousands, 100,000 years ago or more, there's a recognition that bacteria grows there and disease develops and people die. So they simply had to say, we can't do that. So we had to learn self-control. All right? Now, didn't make any sense to us at the time because no one sat down and said, now, you have to do this because little things would grow in there and kill us. That would make no sense to a 2-year-old. All right? In fact, they had no rejection of it. They weren't even offended by the smell as anyone else is. They'll play with it. So there's no recognition of that. Now, my point with that story now is that just as we have preconceived notions, we have post-conceived responses that occur in both cases, for us most of the time, unconsciously. All right? Now, you never brought to consciousness why you said that, but from now on you will. You'll know where that first originated with you, right? And so now if you want to, you'll really be able to say, now do I need to continue to verbalize that response, or do I want to try to train myself differently? Now, even if you try to train yourself, you're going to have a hard time, because that's really deeply embedded in your unconscious at this point in your life. And you don't really need to anyway, because people all understand it anyway. They understand that's what they say too. So it's a little bit embarrassing for a moment, but we all simply empathize, okay? So now, again, let me stress, our minds work almost too, both methodically and mechanically. Now, you're determined to say that, because you didn't choose to say that, you just say it. Follow me? Okay. So now you weren't free in choosing that outburst. And at the same time, you can now become free to change that initial premise and say, well, I really don't need to save energy. I really can take another moment and look on my own to gain self-control. You can go both ways now. That's what I'm getting at. The key now is to recognize both how your initial thoughts influence your actions and also how your conclusions influence your actions. Follow me? Okay, so now what we want to do before I go on, and we're going to try to now, both of those positions there I'm going to say are just natural thought processes. Okay, both are natural thought processes that we do just to adapt in life. Now take the article that I gave you, and we want to see exactly why this sociologist and why doctors create this situation. Now when I ran across this a couple of years ago, and Paulette asked me to talk to, I thought, well, this is exactly what I need to introduce this topic from my perspective. But I have to tell you in advance now, I use this not because I agree with this. Okay? I use this because I think it's hocus pocus. All right? Now you know my premise. All right? I don't know your premises yet. Now, obviously, this author sees this as a worthy concept. And obviously, many doctors see this as a worthy concept. So have you had a chance to read it? You haven't. A few of you have. Well, go ahead and read it quickly, and then we will talk about it. Just take 5 minutes, because you'll read it very quickly. while a few of you are still finishing, I'll go ahead and finish reading it, and I'll just ask a different question for a minute here. I'm going to assume most all of you have probably played video games. For sure, all of you are familiar with them. And you're all familiar with the phrase virtual reality, right? Okay. Now notice here the last line next to the last paragraph is that the authors then claim that such definitions of one another is the result of teamwork by the doctors, patients, and nurses to socially construct reality. Okay, so to kind of get this idea in mind here, that they are socially constructing reality. Why are video games called virtual reality? And what does virtual mean?
Close to, but not real.
But not real. Close to, but not real. But now it's called virtual reality. So it's close to reality, right? All right. Now this is socially constructed reality. All right. Now if it's socially constructed, there must be other kinds of reality that can be constructed as well. Or is there only one socially constructed reality? Now, to kind of help you here, I'll just keep that in mind. Now I'll go over to the first page and read the last paragraph one more time where it says, in this crucial scene. You just need to read the first sentence, actually. The patient cooperates in being an object. Now, the writer of that, what does that mean? Patient cooperates in being an object. And as is becoming, for all practical purposes, a pelvis. Okay? Okay. Separate themselves. Okay, now, when you separate from yourself, what do we generally think of as a person who's separated from him or herself? Not stable. We think they're crazy. You know, schizophrenia means a divided self. So now I don't think that the woman who goes in for an exam is a divided self. In fact, I think if I read this correctly, what does she actually do as a subject or a person? All right, she stares at the wall of the scene. Now, why does she do that? What? To distract herself. Okay. All right. So anyone else want to add to that besides self-distraction? Huh? All right. Now she is embarrassed. Now, and that's part of the reason for the distraction, right? Now, and she's embarrassed, as we think we can all conclude, just as we can about why we said what we did at an accident, is because her privacy has been exposed. Okay, and that's why we call it privates. All right. Now, what she's doing there by looking at the ceiling is really she's keeping herself together. Okay. So the doctor is constructing his reality, or her reality, but in most cases, as they use the word he here, is. Now, why is the doctor doing that from the article and in reality? Why does the doctor construct the reality that way?
From the article, it's because so there's no sexual innuendos, and so that she's not thinking that he's just trying to
be a voyeur or whatever.
Right.
All right. Now, do you think that doctors think about those matters?
They're not supposed to, but I'm sure they do.
They're human.
They're human. Okay. All right. Now, they're not supposed to, but they're human. Okay. Now, why is it human to what makes not supposed to and being human? What makes that being human?
Because it's natural.
Okay, all right, now I agree it's natural. Now what does that really mean? What does natural really mean?
It's a normal reaction. We're sexual beings. That's how we were made.
We're sexual beings.
We're sexual
Okay?
healthy.
All right, now you want to think this through. Now, what I'm trying to get you to do now, keep in mind those first two little stories. I'm trying to get you to see how you want to start with originating what moves people. Okay? Now, that's the question. What moves people? Now, you all, in some fashion, have to do something remotely similar to this. In fact, in my mind, even more personally examining, because you have to examine the entire body, all right, with the exception of the genitals, but you have to examine the entire body. At the same time, the person is very conscious the minute you ask them to disrobe to whatever they're comfortable with. So they're terribly conscious of their own vulnerability, but also their own desires, right? So now, what we want to do a little bit here now is we want to, since it was clearly, even in the description of this so-called play, that she was very conscious of how she might be perceived, and she had to be also very conscious of her own, what I will call, conflicting and uncertain desires, all right? Painful and not so painful. That's just just a wide range is what I'm going to say, okay? Because we're always terribly vulnerable when our bodies are exposed. And what's one of the things that, especially with men, but women too, is no one ever wants to get caught with their pants down. Now, the biggest reason why I don't want to get caught with your pants down, though, is because you can't run. You know, you can't run, and so you have to do what you just have to distract yourself, you know, and that's rarely enough. All right, so you want to again now. What I'm trying to get you to really do now is what they didn't want you to do here, or what most people in a socially constructed world want, is not to be aware of your body. Now, I'm trying to urge you to get very, very aware of your body, okay? And also to allow the other person to get aware of their body, but you have to be so very careful there, as you well know. So now I want to spend a little time dealing with that word natural or normal, or what you said in terms of sexual beings, okay? So now we have to try to understand motion. So now I have to do a little English lesson for a minute here, so you can kind of follow me here. And this always drives people a little bit nuts, but she becomes an object, okay? Now, as I look out, I see, I don't know, 25 or 30 or how many ever objects out around me. You are all objects to me. Now, why are you objects to me? But not only that, I see objects. I mean, you are a mass, okay? I mean, you're a mass, just as I could see if you would remove, I would see 30 chairs. There'd be 30 objects. Okay. But at the same time, our language is confusing here because you're also subjects. Now, how are you subjects? When do they use the word subject? What does a policeman do when they're investigating someone? What do they call the person they're investigating? Subject. Suspect and subject. Right? Okay? Now, they're a subject because they are, subject also means person, right? So now, our language wants to make them objects, but they're really subjects. You follow me? All right? Now, all of you think you want to be objective, but then I think I'm going to say in a minute, you don't want to be objective. And I'll quickly give you an example why you don't want to be objective. Let's just say that when you leave here tonight, lo and behold, you get picked up by you run through a speed trap. Or a motorcycle cop or someone just pulls you over for speeding 12 miles over, or 10 miles over, whatever. Now, do you want an objective judge or do you want a subjective judge?
Never heard it like that before.
All right, now you want to think about this. Well, yeah, we don't want to go to jail. All right, so now you want to, so who is going to be the most responsive for your best interest, an objective judge or a subjective judge?
Subjective.
Subjective. Now, a subjective judge is one who deals with the circumstances in which you commit the crime. All right? Because the law reads that there are always extenuating circumstances, right? And you want to say, oh, please, Judge, it was, really, I'm totally innocent, but I agree that my speedometer didn't work or whatever. Otherwise, you just always want, what you want is, you want the mercy of the court. All right? Now, what I'm getting at here, we think of the word objective and we try to pose it as simply being neutral. All right, but they don't mean the same thing. And objective means that you're only going to focus on the objects, just a person, just as any of your objects out there. But you really want to be seen as a subject, as a person with a unique life, a unique body, and unique desires. But now, even though you have unique bodies and you have unique experiences and you have unique thoughts, at the same time, we're all the same. Okay? Now, I've already shown out that we're all the same with our responding to an accident. Okay? So now we want to try to understand how we are all the same. Okay? We all in this room, I think, are the same in the sense of that we have 5 senses. All right? Now, those 5 senses are your primary source of information. That's where you get all your information is from your 5 senses. Okay. So now, let's go back for a second. Keep that in mind. What you do then is, back to my earlier statement, you may take what you get from those senses and already have prepared a response before you even get it, just as you did when you were 3 years old. But Mom, I don't like vegetables. I like candy. All right? I don't want them. I'm not going to like it. All right? You've already got your mind made up. But let's try to figure out this issue of natural for a minute. Now, why is it natural to have ever-present sexual desire?
Because we're supposed to reproduce. That's our primary point on Earth, is to reproduce.
All right, okay, now follow that. Now notice if that's your primary function, okay? Now, just as it was your primary function to excrete, okay? Now, regardless of the social setting, it's there, all right? It's ever present. Now, the key is how you learn to regulate it or control it or help those whoever you're working with regulate it or control it. So now it gets very confusing, though, because even though it's sexual desire, is sexual desire the same for males and females? That was rather quick.
It's just not as often.
All right. All right. Now we want to try to understand.
She's gonna be all red.
We want to try to follow this here now because you're dealing with both males and females. Okay. Now, it's not as often as your counter response. All right. So I'm going to. So now, is sexual desire best distinguished by frequency of desire? How do we decide what it is?
Energy follows thought. So what you think about is what your perception of reality becomes.
Okay,
So you can control your reality by the way you think.
All right, now you, to a degree. I mean,
That's why you can control your bodily functions.
yes, yes, but at times, I think for all of us would say that our body defies us at various times. Okay? So we don't always control it. Now, we want to try to understand that too for a second here. Now, but before we get that far yet, I want to go back. I want to clarify here. I'm going to, again, to kind of get you aware here, and that is that we can say now, since, and I didn't ask for names, but since we agree that we're all sexual beings, then we must, if that phrase, I'm going to turn that phrase a little bit and say, then we all must have a sexual nature. And that's pretty much the same, right? You would agree? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Now, yes, I'll say, do most of you in here, is that is there a male nature and a female nature, or is it just a sexual nature? I'll phrase it that way.
Sexual nature.
All right. So you'd say that they're both pretty much the same.
It's a desire.
I don't think so.
It's a desire.
It's different in desires, I think, but there might be
The nature is the same, but how we react on them.
Okay, now, and both of you are using words, though, that I'm going to say are abstract words. Okay, they're not very concrete. So now let me see if I can get a little bit more concrete. Now, when I say concrete, back to your five senses. Now, generally, we as humans primarily use our sense of sight. Okay, that's how we see things. Okay, we're much more concerned about what we see than we hear, or taste, touch, or smell. Okay, so we see. Now, obviously, if you look at the genitalia of a male and a female, the sex is quite different. Okay. At the same time, not only is the sex quite different, but the function is very different. Right? Okay. Only females can reproduce and bear young. Okay? That's their charge. Okay. Now, with the issue of desire. Now, think about this for a second, just so you can get this into perspective, what we can see now. A female has how many eggs a year? 12, maybe more if they have twins or triplets, but generally 12. And a male has how many spermatozoa a year?
infinity and beyond.
Billions.
Bunches.
Yeah. Okay. Now, to give you some idea of this, okay, just to try to get this idea in numbers, because I don't know how many it is, but now, if you were going to live a trillion seconds, how long do you think you would have to live a trillion seconds? Do any of you think that you've already lived a trillion seconds in here?
No. I haven't.
You haven't, okay, but you think you have.
I'm just guessing.
You're just guessing. You don't think you have. Okay, and I would agree with you. And how long do you think you'd have to live a trillion seconds?
I'm not sure, but trillion's
Trillion's an awful lot. It would be 31,688 years.
Really?
Yes, that's a lot.
That's how long I want to live.
I don't. I hope not. Keep in mind now, we've only been humans in the form we are, but most anthropologists would argue is about 150,000 years. Okay? 150,000 years. All right? So we haven't been around here too long. Now, back to the issue of reproduction. Now, if you follow this path, so we can understand, so we can get a little bit more understanding of that frequency and that idea of desire, let's try to follow this here so we can understand the female sexual drive and the male sexual drive. Now, obviously, however you want to look at it in a creationist perspective or in an evolutionary perspective, 12 to, say, 24 eggs versus billions of spermatozoa, there's got to be something there about quality and quantity. Right? Okay. Now, we're rational people. We ration what we have. You know, you all ration what you have. So now what's the thinking behind rationing out billions of spermatozoa, and what's the thinking about rationing out 10 or 12 eggs? What? You have to be very choosy. Who does?
Female.
The female. All right. Now, ain't no way the male's going to count his. Okay? So now we have to try to understand now what's going on here in nature that creates such different functions. And how does that function deal with what you had made reference to earlier, and that is how to control the desire. Now, when you say choosy, how does that actually play out in actions?
Fertilization goes.
All right. All right. Now, no, but in terms of desire now.
Women only desire to have sex when they can make a baby.
Primarily. Okay, initially. Okay. Now, at the same time, the male can always make a baby.
Sure.
All right. So his notion there is there really isn't any seed ever wasted. Okay. All right. Now, if the female does choose to have relations, what must she deal with then? Pregnancy. Now, that means for sure she's confined for 9 months. But actually, she's confined for 15, 20 years a day. Right? All right. So now we have another issue, and this one always gets audiences a bit uneasy, mixed audiences, is that we want to try to figure out now in terms of how this desire developed. Now we know something rather sharp, and that is that women have a different sense of quality in terms of their bodies, in terms of quality and quantity, than men do, just tied in with their genitals. At the same time, in general, women are smarter than men. Now, women are smarter than men primarily because they have bodies that equip them to be smarter. Now, first, they've got a body that equips them to be smarter in terms of quality relationships, right? Because they only get 12. They get 12. That's one. Now, the other thing they got is they got something else that man doesn't have, and that is they've got a built-in time clock. Because you get monthlies. You say, oh, thank God. But now what you do there is you've got a built-in way that you know that you've got a plan for the future. So you've got something long before man got, and that is you got a sense of time. So you got future as well as present. All right? Now, at the same time, you got an additional thing that scares you, and that is that what is the most troublesome part, those of you who have birthed, what's the most troublesome part of the baby's appearance and arrival for you? The labor, and in particular, what causes, yes, in particular, what is it that causes the great discomfort? Pushing out, but what is the problem with the pushing out?
Baby's big.
The baby's big, in particular, what part of the baby? Head. All right. Now, keep this in mind for a second. The baby's head is big. Now, just as humans have such a long period of being helpless, just as you feel helpless when you're naked, all right? Now, the baby has a long period of 9 months gestation, but then they have, again, 10 or 15 years or maybe longer to survive before they can function on their own. Okay, much more than most any other animal. All right? But now, even more surprising is, all other animals, the moment they appear, all of their cells are fully formed, and they're where they belong. But the baby's brain cells are still traveling. They keep traveling for another 14 months, 15 months. Baby's brain doesn't have all of its cells in the right place yet. So now why do you think that nature made the brain cells still migrating long after they're born for humans but no other animal? Because if they wouldn't have, that head would have been bigger.
Oh.
And if that head would have been bigger, yes, thank God is right.
Oh, okay.
Because
Wouldn't be two people in here.
that's right. You got it right. And truth of the matter is, that's exactly right. All right. Now, most all of you, when you gave birth, would not have survived it.
Then the men would have to be
All right. They even get lonelier. All right. All right. Now, the point there is, it was a balance between the size of your hips and the size of the baby's head. Okay? And that you evolved or developed, however you want to believe that, is that as a balancing of nature, the size of the baby's head and the size of your hips. Okay? And they were wrenched enough, I'm sure you believe. But again, most women died in birth up until probably not very many, maybe even 2,000 years ago, if not less than that. So there was a tremendous death rate among the mothers. So now what we became aware of was not only the future, but you also had the awareness of death much earlier than anyone else, than males did, because no male ever experienced anything remotely to that. So you've got some built-in, what I'm going to call bodily devices that give you a sense of the future. It gives you a sense of quality. And at the same time, you've got another thing that really does confuse humans, and that is that now think outside of humans for a minute is, what happens, now before I get to my next question, what happens when two dogs encounter one another? Where do they go? Okay. Now, they don't really go to the butt, though. They go to the backside, but they don't go to the butt. They go to the vaginal area. Right? Now, and their aim, of course, is they're not interested in the dog's eyes. They're interested in the dog, whether the dog is in heat or not. Now, when you said earlier, women will desire sex when they're ovulating, okay, because that's when they get pregnant. Now, generally, as a rule, they are more desirous than, as a general rule, researchers have found. But in any case here, this is rather strange, and that is when all other animals go into what is called estrus, or heat, they secrete not only an odor, but they secrete a substance. All right? But the amazing thing for humans is that not even you know always, unless you're really attentive, when you're ovulating. So now you've been concealed of that, but now see, the male of all other species, he was never concealed. He was never denied. He just would go find out. But he can't tell. All right? Now, follow this. You're the only species, female of a species, that has a permanent breast. All other animals, when they're not nursing, the breast simply totally draws back into the rib cage. Now, why do you need a permanent breast?
Because it's
What?
For identification.
For identification? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That's not bad. That's not bad. I mean, now, but who needs to identify you?
The man.
Male. All right? Now, okay, so there must be something attraction, there must be some kind of connection between the breast and the male's attraction. But now, at the same time, we started this discussion with the idea of sexual desire and reproduction. Now follow here the function of the breast. You're suggesting when they're not nursing is for the male. Now that was your suggestion, and I'm not disagreeing. Notice how you can reason about these things without necessarily, just because of your own reasoning powers, without necessarily studying this. Now let me ask, what's the purpose in terms of reproduction of the clitoris?
It's just,
So that women will reject the male, like completely.
All right, all right. All right, now follow that. Now, do you agree with that? Does that sound reasonable? Okay, so now you've got a built-in way in which your body is making it conflicting for you to desire what is dangerous for you. You follow? All right, so it's a nice thing to have, but it's also something that is a rather treacherous thing to have.
Blessing and a curse.
What?
Blessing and a curse.
Yes, a blessing and a curse, all right? Just as the period can be at times, all right? All right? Okay. All right, now, notice this idea of inner conflicts. All right? Now, just as you have that inner conflict, now to tie this in with the issue of desire, now, who is it that always decides whether intercourse will occur or not? Female. Now, at the same time, though, humans are the only ones that, and within humans, only men rape. Men rape women or rape other men, but women don't rape men. Okay? So now that's just further proof that the only way the men get to have their choice is if they use their physical might. Right? All right. So now what I'm getting at here is that, back to the original discussion, because we're going to run out of time if I'm not careful here. Back to the original discussion here is that each of us, male and female now, have desires that are linked to bodily parts, but they're different mental concepts to those desires. You follow me there? Okay. So now let's deal with the issue of awkwardness, or, well, maybe I better just for a second here. The male's erection is, just as the female's clitoris is for desire, the male's erection is primarily, yes, but why does it need to become erect? For penetration. Okay? Now, all of that is just simply a part of the mechanism, but now can you see that the reproductive tasks of being human are never equal? You follow me there? All right. So now we have a situation here where men and women are not equal around the basic issue of reproduction. Now, how does that deal now with the issue of human motivation in terms of interacting between males and females? Let me see if I can make this a little clearer here. What is automatically on the male's mind when he sees a female? Okay, specifically, even more frankly, it's how can I get her into bed? Okay, now notice here, we are in such a hurry that we use the word sex. But now, you don't have sex, you are a sex. You're either a male sex or a female sex. You can have sexual intercourse, but that takes too long to speak. And sometimes we're in such a hurry, we don't even want to use the whole phrase. Okay? All right? Now, notice how we've moved so rapidly in such a hurry to try to address an issue that is so very vital. So now what I want to try to do for a minute here now is to kind of, I want to do two things before we quit here yet. First, I want to go back now. This was a social construction of reality. Now with this, what I'm going to call this sexual construction of reality, how do we find a way to protect ourselves or guard ourselves in the setting that you're in or in the setting that the doctor's in? Is there a better way than what is done here by turning the patient into an object? If there's any validity to what I've said, I'm suggesting that we need a different construction of reality than turning the patient or the person you're treating into an object.
With a patient,
Treat him like a person, okay? So now, what?
patient can ask questions.
Okay, now treat him as a person, but now we have to treat the male sex as a male person and the female sex as a female person, all right? Now, remember when I said you go to the refrigerator with an idea about the jelly, what's in the refrigerator? Now I'm going to say that we automatically now should think that when we go to the male, we already have ways now in which we can understand what is prodding their bodily actions. You follow me there? All right, I'm going to say that again. Now, what I'm saying is, when you said they think about having sex, okay. Now, what I'm saying, though, is that when you say, most women, when they say that rather, you know, doofus that's all he's got on his mind, you know. He's not very sensitive to anything else. He's just driven by that drive, okay? All right. Now, what I'm saying is that he can't help but have that on his mind. The key is, though, whether he wants to find a way in which he's aware enough that he really is in control. Okay? That's the key that you need to know, and he needs to know. Let me see if I can address this a little bit more for a second here.
So is that how the doctor handles the situation, is treats the woman like an object because he doesn't want to see her as
Exactly.
sexual?
He knows, because he will to himself. There's no question. He will, and if he has a colleague, they'll discuss those matters after hours.
So he turns her into an object.
Yes. See, now he's doing that for himself. He's not doing that for her. You know, he may argue he's doing that for legal protection, but he's really doing it for personal protection. All right? Now, see, what he's doing there is he's building in a social way so he doesn't have to look at the ceiling, because he can't afford to do that. All right. But now to kind of close with this here, what makes this issue, even with your awareness of it, what makes this issue dangerous? What makes this issue of desire dangerous in your line of work?
Professional mind.
Yeah, right. But now, what will potentially cause the crossing of the professional line?
Making that person feel uncomfortable.
That, well, it'd be that, but I'm going to say now, and you're halfway there now. Keep in mind now, we have all the same senses. We have all the same desires now, okay? Just different between male desires and female desires. But women's desires are the same and men's desires are all the same. Now, we have another thing that is common to us all, and that is we all have the same emotions. Okay? All people have the same emotions. Now, our emotions are all the same, but they get expressed differently because of our bodies. Men feel awkwardness, feel vulnerability, feel embarrassment, feel shame. They feel all those same feelings that the female feels, only they don't feel them in the same experience. Now, what might be embarrassing or shameful to you because of your physiology will not be shameful or embarrassing to the male. All right? So as you kind of think through this and as you create your own construction of reality with the person you're serving, you want to be aware first of the physiology, and then you want to be aware of the emotionality. Now, the emotionality, the emotion that begins to occur, generally only occurs with repetitive experiences. Because, as you mentioned, the key there is that what will follow is the comfort zone. And it's with the comfort zone that comes the letting down of one's guard for both the person being treated as well as the practitioner. I don't want time to quit. I'll just take, do we have just a minute? And then we'll take questions. Now, I want to just deal with one other issue of back to the subject and object to kind of get us out of this for a minute. We can go back to it for questions. But, and that is when you are self-evaluating. Now, all of you will have to do that because all of you want to assess your effectiveness. Now, you assess your effectiveness by the respondents. You know, just as you have here, you have a questionnaire that the person fills out. Okay, but that at the same time, I'm going to say, is not really totally satisfying. And the reason why I'm going to say it's not totally satisfying is because generally you'll think, well, they'll almost always be polite. Okay. And you'll often say, well, I don't know if some will not be quite as polite, or not be, but you'll think that you have done a really good job at that time, but the other person, or the person that's being treated, doesn't think so. Now, what's the standard that you can create for yourself on that issue of self-evaluation? How do you evaluate yourself, whether you did a good job or not? Any thoughts?
Did the best that you could do.
Okay, now that's pretty subjective.
Be honest.
What?
Be honest.
Be honest, but I'm going to say for a minute is, now I'm going to just tie together again. Just as I did the physiology and the emotionality, now I'm going to do the physiology and the emotionality within yourself. The physiology, the first thing you'll evaluate yourself with, I'm going to say, by the weariness that you feel. Because it's a very physical enterprise that you've undergone. I mean, you'll feel it in your hands, or you'll feel it in your arms, you'll feel it in your neck or back. You'll just feel weary because it was a strain. You'll feel it that way. And then the other way you're going to do, I'm going to say now is to get, when you use the phrase, do the best that you can, now you want to say to yourself, now, when was I mechanical, and when was I really aware, and set some standards for you can be beginning to say to yourself that these are my subjective standards as well. When was I daydreaming, or when was I kind of getting in touch with the music, or paying more attention to something else? And if you start using that standard, then you can get where you feel a little bit more that you have a tool for self-evaluation that can be somewhat, what I'm going to say, comforting, that is nice for development. Any questions on anything that we've...
Couldn't you, when you, like the doctor, view that patient as a daughter, and then you have a different view?
That's interesting. That's a good point. Now you,
or as a mother.
Mother, yes, or son, or whatever. Yeah, that's a good point. Now I think you can. Now what you're doing there is, and this is not bad. In one level, you are imagining. Okay. Now we all imagine. Okay. But it's real dangerous in some ways to do that, because then you start to impose your values and your emotions onto that object. And so you want to be kind of careful of that. And I'll just end this way. When we daydream, okay, we all, just as we all have the common responses I've been saying before, we all daydream the same thing. All of our daydreams are the same. We only have two daydreams. They're either how wonderful we're going to be in some fashion, or some sexual daydream. The daydream is always about how good you're going to be in something, or it has some sexual erotic tone to it. Okay? So again, that issue of sexual desire is always coming to the forefront in some fashion. And the counter one is your sense of goodness, being good in some respect. Anything else? Well, thank you very much.